People have been asking me how I'm going about running in my new Mahindra, because after all, as they say, you don't have to run in new vehicles these days. They're too well engineered. Well, the people who are telling you that want to sell you a new vehicle every 3 or 4 years, don't they? So at the end of the day, here's an old bush mechanics version of how you should treat a new vehicle, based on the complete experience of having owned one new Mahindra ever. I've had a few new bikes over the years. I've had bikes for years and years. In fact, for me, it all started with motorbikes. And I think if you're a mechanic, even a bush mechanic, once you've pulled something apart, once you've had a look at what happens underneath that lever or underneath that pedal, even underneath that switch, you tend to get a totally different idea on how you should treat that component from now on if you want it to last a long time. It's not just about lasting a long time. You want to treat machines so that when you really need it, it's there for you. This, folks, is mechanical sympathy. And in my case, it came from a lifetime of making machines last as long as possible, for whatever reason, you know. As a kid, it's because if you live in the bush and you want to get to town and meet some girls, well, you better have a reliable vehicle of some sort. But if you didn't have any money, then you probably had to build it out of rubbish or something else. Now, over the years, I've hung on to things too, so I've had plenty of time to work them out. I mean, there's an old BMW in the shed that I've had since I was 18. My first motorbike is still in there, a Matchless. Well, it wasn't the first. A little BSA Bantam was the first. Matchless was the first real one. Had real adventures on that. And then, of course, there's Ruby, my 1984 Harley that a whole lot of you probably recognise if you've been into bikes for a while. It was a bit of a hero in the magazine world for a long time. She did 750,000 kilometres, 4 crank pins, 40 thou over. She's been rebuilt quite a few times. Did it all myself. So I got to see what worked and what didn't work over the long term. Mechanical sympathy is 2 little words, but if you understand it, if you can just bring your head into gear with your machine, then you can make something last, well, maybe not forever, but for a long, long time. I started out with a BSA Bantam at the age of 12, and pretty soon, you know, it was a pathetic little thing, but pretty soon I had to pull it to bits to find out what was going on in there. I guess the biggest surprise was how delicate machines are underneath the levers. Once you've realised that there are wear surfaces that are wearing all the time, or wearing if you're leaning on them, you'll never ever put your hand on a gear stick again, unless you need to change gears. And when you do, you won't be pushing it around all macho-like. You'll be using the bare minimum of effort to change the gear every time you do it. It's the same with everything, you know. Look at brakes. I mean, brakes work on friction. Something is wearing out every time you touch that brake pedal. If you leave your lazy foot on the brake pedal, it just works by squeezing, doesn't it? It's 2 pads squeezing a disc, or shoes pushing out against the drum. Those are wear surfaces. So how do you get around that? You've still got to stop. Of course you do. But you don't ride the brakes. You don't leave your foot on the pedal all the way down the hill. You just dab them. Dab, dab, dab. You know, give them a chance to cool off in between squeezing operations, between heating up. Where possible, change into a lower gear. In an automatic, you know, select a lower gear. Let the engine do some of the braking. But don't get into that silly habit of, you know, shifting down through the gears on every corner. You're just going to rip up the clutch, because at the end of the day, the clutch is based on that too, isn't it, really? A clutch is just a big friction pack, and you've got a throw-out bearing that's touching it. If your lazy foot is on the pedal, it's touching it all the time. It's wearing itself out all the time. Sure, it might take ages to do it, but why do it now? Why do it in the traffic? Why waste effort just getting out your drive and doing your daily stuff when you really might need that in the bush one day to jump out of a gutter or something else? And this isn't just about clutches and brakes. It's about every component in a vehicle. Everything. The indicator stalk. Do you really need to slam it, or can you just lightly move it into position? The doors. You know, in the factories, when they're testing components, every component is tested to X number. So it'll be like 100,000 slams of the door, and if the hinges don't fall off, she's a beauty. But imagine that. You could get 500,000 slams of the door if you didn't slam it, if you just, gently nodged it in every time. And it's pretty much the same with every component. One day you might have to jam something, slam something, throw something, but most of the time you don't. So it's really about establishing habits. Running in a vehicle is about establishing habits and wear patterns that will make it last for as long as physically possible, which is probably as long as you're going to be driving it. There's also a whole world on the other side of mechanical sympathy, which is called servicing. All right? Now, if you don't do your own servicing, that's fine. Just make sure whoever's doing it is doing it properly. Some people say you only need to change the filter every now and then and things like that. Yeah, well, if you want to run nice fresh oil through a dirty filter, that's up to you. But never ever go, it'll be right, it's not a problem, whatever. You need to stay on top of stuff like this. You need to use good oil, in my case Righto, I've been using it since I was a kid, and good filters, and do it as often as you can. Now, in the case of the Mahindra, apparently the first service is at 10,000 Ks. At 5,000 Ks, they have a look under the bonnet, check the oil, and at 10,000, you get it serviced. Well, I borrowed one for a year and I did exactly that, and it was fine, no problem at all. But with my own, it got to 4,000 Ks, and out came the oil, because I had no idea what oil it came from the factory, and in went the Penrite and a new filter. And that is what I intend doing with this machine, just like I did with Ruby, my Harley, and my old BM, and Milo. Milo survived so long because it got the best possible treatment all the way through. When it needed something, it got quality parts, terrain tamer parts, it got filters, it got oil changes every trip. Milo wound up on what we call a rally schedule, which means you check wheel bearings and things like that. You re-grease things, you do things based on the kilometres, based on the work that it's just done, based on whether or not it was, up to its roof in mud for the last couple of weeks. Everything determined the way the vehicle was looked after. So if you combine gentle driving and good servicing, you're going to have a vehicle that will perform when you need it to, no matter what you ask of it. And it's going to keep going economically for the longest possible time. Well, there you go, folks. I know I'm just an old bush mechanic, but I've got some pretty strong views on how machines should be treated so that they'll last. If you disagree, let me know below.